All right. Hello. I think we're going to get this event started. I think we're going to still have some people trickling in over the next couple minutes. But thank you all for coming out tonight to our Back to School with Electric Buses webinar. My name is Eve, and I'm a Global Warming Solutions Associate with Environment America. And I'm super excited to be joined tonight by Duncan McIntyre and Todd Watkins to hear about their expertise and information about electric school buses. And just so you know, if you do have any questions that you'd like to ask our speakers tonight, you can use the Q&A function. So there should be a button that says Q&A on your Zoom screen, and you can submit a question there anonymously that we'll get to answer in the second half of our webinar during the Q&A section. And so before I pass it off to our featured speakers tonight, I'm just going to give a little bit of context on why electric buses are so important and why it's really exciting to be working on them right now. So first off, just what do school buses have to do with climate change anyway? So in the US, transportation is now actually the #1 contributor to the climate crisis. And so I know we're joining in from all across the country today. And so in some shape or form, we've all seen the devastation that climate change can bring this summer. We've seen record-breaking heat waves, devastating wildfires, and intense flash flooding. And scientists are saying that these impacts are coming even faster than they previously expected them to. So we have to do everything in our power to curb the progression of climate change. And the first step to do so is to clean up how we get around. So on the school bus side of things, nearly 95% of our school buses across the country still run on diesel. That's over 450,000 school buses that are running on this dirty fossil fuel. And so electric buses can provide an opportunity to change that. If we were to live in a world with 100% electric school buses, we could avoid 5.3 million tons of greenhouse gas emissions every single year. And electric buses truly are the best option for tackling the climate crisis. Studies have shown that when compared to other alternative fuel vehicles like diesel, hybrid, electric, or methane gas buses, electric buses have less than half of the global warming pollution than these other alternatives. And that's just going to continue to decrease as we make sure that our electricity sector runs more and more on renewable energy. And so that's why at Environment America and PIRG, we're both working to electrify our transportation sector and work to get our electricity sector powered more and more by renewables so we can reach 100% renewable energy for our electricity sector. And this way we can truly have an 100% zero emission transportation sector. So in addition to impacting our climate, school buses also impact our health. And that's because diesel is a toxic pollutant. It's internationally recognized as a cancer-causing agent and also contributes to respiratory diseases like asthma. Kids, school buses' main passengers are especially susceptible to these impacts because their lungs are still developing. But electric school buses, on the other hand, have zero tailpipe emissions. And so if we were to live in a world again where we had 100% electric school buses, every day, twice a day, that's of the over 20 million kids who ride school buses every year would not be exposed to these toxic chemicals. And so all of these benefits for electric school buses sound really great, and they are. And you might be asking yourself, why haven't we made the switch already? And the answer to that is money. And so I know my other speakers tonight are going to be talking about this in a little bit more detail, but just to give some general context, electric buses are still about 3 times the cost of their diesel counterparts. And so even though down the line, electric buses do provide savings for schools in reduced maintenance and fuel costs, that upfront cost is still a primary barrier for schools trying to electrify their school bus fleets. So that's why it's really, really important that we make sure that our state and federal governments invest more in school buses and electrifying our school bus fleets so that school districts can electrify their school bus fleets to protect kids from these harmful air and climate pollution. And so what progress has been made on this front so far? Well, here at Environment America and PIRG, we worked for years to clean up the transportation sector. Our Destination Zero Carbon campaign has a goal to make sure that all transit and school buses are completely electric by 2030. In July of this year, we garnered over 120 signatures from school officials to sign on to our letter that we sent to Congress and the Biden administration calling for $30 billion in electric school bus federal funding. I think this really displays that this is an issue that across the country, people are addressing and understand is important, and that funding is really the primary barrier to adoption of electric school buses. And there has been some progress since then. Earlier this month, the Senate passed a bipartisan infrastructure package that allocates $2.5 billion specifically for electric school buses. This is a really great step, and it's important that we get this bill passed so schools can access this necessary funding. But it's also, as we know, not enough. And we need to keep going and get more funding so we can truly electrify the entire school bus fleet. And so currently at Environment America, we're urging Congress to allocate an additional $22.5 billion for electric school buses for a total of $25 billion, because we believe this funding is necessary to jumpstart this transition to an 100% electric school bus fleet by 2030. And with that, I'm really excited to introduce our two speakers today, Duncan McIntyre and Todd Watkins. They're going to talk a little bit about how they worked together this year to purchase over 300 electric school buses in Maryland, the largest purchase of electric school buses in history, and about how other school districts can do the same. And so to start us off, I'll just give a brief introduction for Duncan. As I said before, Duncan McIntyre is the CEO of Highland Electric Fleet, and he founded the company in 2018. He's responsible for its overall company vision and leadership and strategy by playing key roles in all aspects of sales, financing, and operations. Duncan previously founded Altinex in 2011, a marketplace for renewable energy procurement, analysis, deal structuring, and led its successful sale to Edison International in 2015. While at Altinex, he built over 2 gigawatts of utility-scale renewable energy for corporations, and Duncan has also had a prior career in venture capital and investment banking. His background covers many aspects of energy, including financing, new technology, implementation, business model development, procurement, and team building. And so with that, I'm going to pass it over to Duncan.
Thank you, Eve. Appreciate the introduction and sort of the landscape. You get some great statistics there, and it's a good reminder as to why we're all here doing what we're doing, and it's a great vision for the future, frankly. Eve teed it up perfectly. I'm the CEO of Highland. We're a company based in Massachusetts, but with a growing presence around the country. And we focus entirely on school bus electrification. Our perspective is that there's a tremendous amount of interest from the market, but the cost barrier that Eve outlined is spot on. It's one of the key barriers. We would actually add a second barrier, which is complexity. These projects require pretty tight integration with electric utility providers. There's a whole infrastructure design. There's hardware and software decisions and networking, and all these things have to kind of come together in a way that delivers safety and reliability and affordability to operators like Todd. So with that, Eve, maybe we'll dive in. This is a question we typically ask when we're speaking with anyone. Why do you want to go electric? Is it climate change? Is it local health? Is it pediatric asthma you're looking to tackle? Is it getting in front of new technology and being at the forefront of the transition happening within mobility more broadly? These can all be correct answers. So let's flip to the next, Steve. I think these three things need to be present in order for fleet electrification to happen at scale. The funding has to be there in one form or another, and that leads to affordability. It's very difficult to ask a taxpayer a local taxpayer to double the price of school bus transportation. Those are difficult discussions at the local level, so they have to be affordable. The health dynamics have to be there, so zero emission at the tailpipe is key, and they have to be really reliable. And that's all aspects have to be reliable: the charging infrastructure, the vehicles, and the ways in which they all integrate. So let's flip forward. I think one of the perspectives that we have on the topic of cost is that over time, different categories of vehicles are becoming more affordable to electrify. you described this big upfront cost barrier, which is true. But when you take a total cost of ownership perspective, there are downstream values that need to be sort of considered. One of them is the fact that electricity is cheaper than diesel fuel. So there's savings on fuel. There's savings on maintenance, the market believes, but I think it'll take a number of years to really prove out and quantify the specifics around how much cheaper it is to maintain an electric than a diesel vehicle. There's also a good amount of energy density in the batteries that propel these buses forward. And as a result, they can act as energy tools for the utilities and energy markets. And so this concept of value moving to the grid edge is a concept that we believe in. And we're really working hard on extracting value so that electrification of school bus fleets can be more affordable to schools. I think, school buses fall somewhere sort of, probably should be its own category on this chart. But the point is, affordability, we think, is sooner than the market perceives it to be today. So let's flip forward. I think these are areas of opportunity that we think are all on the table today, and all becoming more and more affordable, and the equipment becoming more and more reliable. And the net result is that we think these fleets will all start to electrify with their own cadence, in the coming years. So why is now a good time for Highland and for Montgomery County to embark on this journey? Well, let's talk a little bit more about it. Eve, if you want to flip to the next slide, that would be great. I mentioned these upfront challenges around cost and complexity. I think if you think about an operation like Todd's operation, it's very complex. There are 5 depots. There are 1,400 vehicles. I'm sure he can speak to total staff size, but it's well in excess of the number of vehicles. There are mechanics, there's safety, there's dispatch. There's a lot of pieces in place just to operate that fleet. When you layer in charging equipment, and you layer in utility interconnection work, and you layer in how to operate a battery, it's just a new set of complexities. And so we think there's support that can come from folks like Highland with expertise in those areas to really fill in the gaps around what Todd and his team do so well today. So let's flip to the next slide. So what do we offer? We offer what we call an electric fleet subscription. This is really a bundle of financing and services so that the upfront cost can be eliminated as a key barrier, and services that can cut down some of the complexities and establish a real risk transfer from municipalities to entities like Highland. And what that does is lets us bundle these, the equipment and the services needed into sort of a annual fee for a number of miles. So it sort of boils down to a per mile fee. Let's flip one more slide, please. So this is the offering. It's really the planning and the upfront work that is needed. Sort of many detailed discussions with Todd and his team about the mileage and how they maintain the vehicles, and where they start and where they stop, and what the terrain looks like, and the temperature, and sort of there's a whole bunch of planning around the equipment you need to make the transition successful. We finance the whole package and pay for the buses and the chargers. We build, and build is really construction that happens at the sites to electrify the depots and network them in a way that the equipment can be reliable and well managed. We add train. Much of the training actually is done by American Bus Sales, which is the Thomas-built dealer in Maryland. And they do a fantastic job. They've had a long-term relationship with Montgomery County and many other fleets in Maryland, but they have an incredible maintenance staff and an incredible training system already set up. But the point is, the offering has to include training so that Todd's team gets fully briefed on how to use the charging stations, how to maintain the vehicles, and they have the support network on the ground to make it all happen. And then once the programs are launched and the fleets are in place, we actually manage the charging stations and sort of tell them when to put power into the vehicles, how quickly to put power into the vehicles. And we take on that financial responsibility of what it costs to power these vehicles. So that's all rolled in. Lastly, maintenance is done by Todd's Mechanics and done by American Bus Sales, but we wrap in the cost and reimburse for the costs of parts and labor. And I think the key sort of comment to make there is this is new technology. And so the market is getting more comfortable, but still doesn't know exactly what it's going to cost to maintain this new equipment. I think one key concern is that the batteries will only last something less than 12 years. And so by taking on that obligation, it makes the transition easier because there isn't a financial uncertainty around maintenance. So let's flip one more slide. I think just to come full circle, it's the Montgomery County fleet. It's Todd's fleet. It's his drivers, it's his mechanics, it's his entire team doing what they do today. Not in the business of outsourcing. We're in the business of filling in the gaps, providing equipment and providing services to supplement what is really one of the most impressive transportation operations we've ever seen. And so I think that's a key piece is we're really not a third-party fleet manager. We're not an outsourcing entity. We fill in gaps, provide financing, and provide services. So let's flip one more slide. This is actually an example of a fleet we've had in operation for the past year in Beverly, Massachusetts. And, I think just to sort of maybe call out a few items, we, of course, designed, built, and financed and trained the staff. And we work closely with them on a daily basis on the specifics of keeping the, keeping the project up and running. Lastly, I would also say the depot has electrification for 24 school buses and acts as a resource for National Grid, the local utility. So we send power back to the grid when it's available and when they need it, and that helps lower the cost to the district. And we work very hard on doing that everywhere. And I think that's it, unless there's one more slide. But I'm more than happy to answer any questions throughout, at the end, or anyone should feel free to get in touch with us. I'm more than happy to go into more detail.
Thank you so much, Duncan, for that overview and explanation of this way to make it a lot easier for school buses to electrify their fleet. And so now I'm really excited, to introduce our next speaker, Todd Watkins. So Todd Watkins, as I said, is the Director of Transportation at Montgomery County Public Schools, Maryland, and he's been working with MCPS since 1996 and acting in his current position as director since 2009. Last year, he was named as the Director of the Year by national magazine School Transportation News and appeared on their cover, and they particularly highlighted his empathy for staff, students, and parents that he serves, and his managerial style that emphasizes meeting people where they're at so they have the best chance of success. And Watkins has worked a long time in the transportation sector, starting in college on the University of Maryland's commuter route, and has a master's in health education. And so with that, I'm going to pass it over to you, Todd.
Thank you very much, Eve. And thank you, Duncan, for your great summary of how we're working together there. While I appreciate you saying you supplement in the area of electric buses and not fleet operations, if you you have 100 extra drivers in your spare pocket, I wouldn't mind being supplemented there right now as we start school next week. Kind of probably one of the biggest issues in school transportation right now is the nationwide shortage of drivers. But anyway, we're here to talk about electric buses. And so even if you flip to the next slide, I will talk a little bit about how we got where we are. I'll start by telling you where we were. So I was, as a local director of transportation, hearing lots of information about electric school buses. I was hearing from board members and student groups and environmental groups around me, from political leaders, all saying, hey, you should consider going electric. I was also hearing the big three US manufacturers in a national school transportation meeting saying that they anticipate somewhere in the next 5 to 10 years, either all or almost all of their orders switching over to orders for new electric buses. So I could tell there was lots of interest and really some pressure from all around me. But I had this concern that Duncan talked about the big financial upfront cost. And I figured we could get a grant and buy a bus or two or something like that. But then I was worried about getting all of those groups excited about us starting to electrify, and then it being an effort that we couldn't sustain financially, right? We certainly didn't want to afford, I don't know whether we could have, but we certainly didn't want to afford vehicles that were 3 times the cost of the diesels that we were buying. And so I had a great plan of getting a Volkswagen mitigation grant and going out and that covered the cost differential of one electric bus that I announced I was going out to buy. And I thought that would make everybody excited that I was at least kind of dipping my pinky toe in the electric waters. And instead it irritated everybody, right? What do you mean only one? You know, and so I was kind of surprised in a bad way by that reaction. And so that wasn't working out so well for me. So next slide. So about that time, I was summoned to a meeting by my county executive, and I was told I was going to meet a company there named by the name of Highland. And so prior to getting to the meeting, I say to many people, I was impressed that Duncan called me up and said, hey, Todd, you're the guy in this meeting that we really want to work with, so I don't want to blindside you in this meeting. And he called and briefed me on what he was going to talk about. So right from the beginning, I was impressed. And so in this meeting, he presented this plan they have, this, what I think is a very visionary and brilliant plan to make the electrification of the diesel school bus fleet cost neutral. And so during the course of this hour or so meeting, I was A, thinking this is too good to be true, but B, thinking if it is true, all of my excuses have evaporated in the course of one meeting. And so my mental wheels were really spinning. Next slide, Eve. So I left the meeting and started immediately investigating the legitimacy of this notion of being cost neutral. I was really, it took me a while to wrap my head around the fact that we could get vehicles that were 3 times the cost and spend no more money than we were already spending on diesels. And so as we started to investigate that, talking to Highland and some others in the market, the more we investigated the claim, the more we found that there really was some legitimacy to it. And so because we're a public school system and are subject to public procurement rules, we quickly pivoted and went out in the marketplace with an RFI, a request for information. We wanted to find out who else out there might offer something similar to what Highland was proposing, or who might have a better mousetrap, right? In all honesty, we wanted to see what was available out there. Well, as it turns out, our responses, out of the responses we got to the RFI, we learned a lot about what was available out there in the marketplace. And much of that learning came from Highland's response to the RFI. Then we used that information to build what we think is a good RFP, and went back out with that once again to see who had the best offerings out there. And because I'm here with Duncan McIntyre in this webinar, you can guess that Highland had the best proposal. And so we pre-awarded to Highland. They had by far the most comprehensive proposal in a number of ways. There were some of the others that responded. A couple others were just purely leasing companies. It was very clear that that was their business. They would buy vehicles and lease them to people. with not a whole lot of other support. And then there was a national level school bus contracting operation also that responded. But Highlands, in our opinion, in our judgment, was by far the most comprehensive and complete. And so we pre-awarded to them and started working on a contract. We hired an outside law firm to help us navigate that venture. And we worked on all the nitty-gritty details of exactly what this would look like. We wanted to enter into a contract that would set us up to electrify our entire fleet, something we would do in a period of about 12 years. We use a school bus in Maryland for 12 years. And so we plan to convert as we retire buses and replace them with new ones. So we got down almost to the point where we were ready to sign on the dotted line on the contract. And then I suddenly had a thought that I had not spent nearly as much time looking at the financial model. And, you know, it had been provided by Highland. It was very complex. And I was about to go tell my school board that I had a budget neutral model for them. And I hadn't done much investigating. So I put the brakes on for a couple of weeks on the signing of the contract and I asked some folks from our budget and finance office to help me. And we combed through every single formula in this complex Excel spreadsheet and made sure that I could go with confidence with my budget neutral claim. And it turns out that it was exactly what they said it was, but with 326 buses over 4 years that we've contracted for, I figured one typo in a formula in a spreadsheet like that could cause you to be off by millions. But it turns out it was accurate in the modeling, and then we're going to see this lived out over the next X number of years. But anyway, we are getting 25 electric buses this fall out of our total purchase of 120. Next year, it'll be 61 electric and the rest diesel. And then after that, it'll be 120 electric buses each year and no more diesels. So from 2 years from now, so 14 years from now, we should have 100% electric school bus fleet. Next slide. So here's how it works. It's a turnkey project. Based on the information we got in the RFI, we asked for the whole kit and caboodle, right? We asked for the use of the bus, the design, install, and operation of the charging infrastructure, the maintenance of the buses, and the electric they run on. We asked for everything. And some of the other respondents told us we were nuts and you couldn't ask for those things and nobody would provide them, but it turned out that Highland does. And so that's how the proposal works. Next slide. So it actually turns out in the financial model to be the same amount that we otherwise would be spending on the purchase, maintenance, and fueling of diesel buses. It's the same that we're going to spend on the electric bus for about the first 7 years, and then it actually becomes cheaper than the diesels. And that, like Duncan said, that's because of declining EV prices, electric vehicle prices, while diesel prices are increasing, right? Diesel prices have been increasing over the last couple of decades, and that's largely due to new emissions control requirements, and we certainly expect to see more of those in a Biden administration. And so we expect diesel prices to continue to go up and electric school bus prices to go down, just like we've seen with Teslas and other electric cars, and we've seen with every piece of technology we've ever used, right? It's also cheaper to run on electric than diesel, right? And the maintenance, we think we're going to get 50+% cost savings there. Next slide. So here's why it worked for us, right? So I told you my excuses all evaporated in the course of that meeting with my county executive at Highland. The reason why it worked is that Highland took on all the risk that was keeping me from jumping in, right? I wanted to go really slowly because I was worried grants would dry up. I was worried we couldn't sustain the high upfront costs. And you know, this thing about vehicle grid, I didn't know anything about that. I understood you could get some revenue from that, but I didn't know any more about it. And so Highland took on all those risks. I know exactly what the 326 electric school buses that we're starting with in the first 4 years, I know exactly what they're going to cost me for their entire 12-year life, because that one price includes everything. The only thing not included is if we wreck the bus, right? So either we pay for it if it was our fault, or the other party pays for it if it was their fault. Other than that, Highland takes care of the cost. Highland took on the risk of the vehicle to grid, right? Turns out the Highland equipment is ready to go vehicle grid right now, but our electric utility isn't. And so that might take a year for them to get ready. It might take 10 years, but Highland takes on that risk. They eliminated the need for us to come up with any additional money. We're only going to spend what we already were planning to spend on diesel buses. And like I said, all my excuses evaporated. Next slide. So if you have questions for me, I'm happy to answer those during the Q&A, or there's my contact information if you want to shoot me an email. So back to you, Eve.
Thank you so much, Todd, for explaining all of that, and congratulations to you and your school district for making a plan to get your fleet to 100% electric. That's no small feat. And so before we jump into the Q&A for the second half of the webinar, I just wanted to give everyone in the audience an opportunity to act on climate right now. And so as we know that the Senate has already taken some steps to act on climate and invest in electric school buses and other clean transportation, we also know that they have to go a lot farther to get to 100% electric school bus fleet by 2030 and other goals to combat the climate crisis. So right now, I want to give you an opportunity to tell your senators to act now on climate by making big, bold investments in clean energy and clean transportation. And you can do that. My colleague Mac is going to drop a link in the chat, and you can go fill out that link. It's going to send an email to your senators. You can personalize the message to them as well if you have a specific reason that you care about climate change or want to fight for more clean transportation and clean energy. And it only takes a couple minutes to fill out. So if you want to do that right now or after the webinar has ended, feel free. And thank you in advance for taking action on climate today. So I'm just going to give everyone a second to open up that link, and then we can transition to questions. Just gonna stop sharing my screen now so we can all have a little bit more of a discussion and get some of these questions started. All right. So just to start off, our questions, and again, if you have any additional questions, feel free to put them in the Q&A, and we'll try to do our best to get to them during the rest of the webinar. But just to start off, I know that both of you mentioned vehicle to grid technology as one of the aspects of electric school buses. That's pretty exciting. So I just wanted to ask you to elaborate a little bit more about what that means and why that can benefit school districts and utilities.
Okay.
I'm happy to start. Sure. If you think about the way we generate and use electricity here in the United States, we essentially make it on demand. So there's a forecast in every region for how much electricity is probably going to be needed tomorrow. And it's done in very granular increments. And it's based on the temperature tomorrow and, whether it's a weekday and all sorts of planning tools. But the bottom line is, in the past, we generated power with very centralized, large fossil fuel plants that could be ramped up and down. We're shifting to a more distributed generating environment. Renewable energy is a big part of the equation now, and it's less reliable in terms of the specific times that it generates. So there's a need to balance the supply and demand of electricity. I think batteries are maybe the best technology we have, energy storage in general, but batteries specifically are very nimble and very capable of providing that balancing for our utilities and our energy markets. The problem is they're too expensive. And so it's really difficult to put enough batteries around the country to do all this balancing. But if you have electric school buses that are sitting idle in the evenings, on the weekends, over the summer, those batteries can be plugged in and networked and leveraged to really help the grid do that balancing. So that the market's, I would say, in its infancy, but there's a tremendous amount of promise. And we've spent this summer operating the Beverly Project in a vehicle to grid environment with National Grid, where we believe it's the first commercially operable vehicle to grid project with a school bus participating in a real market in the US. And that activity, again, helps offset the cost of pupil transportation. So we think there's a tremendous amount of merit to really sort out the technology and the commercial side of how these programs get designed and rolled out.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Duncan. I
No
think that
problem.
we may have lost Todd, but hopefully he makes it back on Zoom for some technical difficulties. And I guess another question that we have in the chat that I can start to answer, and then Duncan, if you have more thoughts as well, is just how can community members help support or push their school districts to make the transition to electric buses? And so I think that's a really great question, and glad that you're asking. I think one of the big places where this can start is telling your school board that this is something that's of interest to you, because that's, as Todd was saying, the board that you have to present to show that there's support for electric school buses. And so that's the kind of school officials that we reached out to earlier this year for our sign-on letter to Congress, was to get school officials, Department of Transportation directors, and the school board members, superintendents. And so I think reaching out to those people directly, but also just kind of generating more information about this issue in your own community, because I think this is something that a lot of people, once they realize about it, it's like, oh, this is a really great thing, but might not think about it generally. And so I think just sharing this information that you've learned with friends and asking them to get involved in different ways is a great way to start. But I don't know if, Duncan, you have any other thoughts. And also, Todd, the question that we're thinking about right now is what ways can community members get involved to help push their school districts to make the transition to electric buses?
Yeah, great. Sorry, I had a little bit of an internet problem there for a second. So I have a little bit of a hard time with this one because I didn't have any resistance in my school system, right? I was telling Duncan last week, I was kind of the biggest resistor in my school district. So once they convinced me that they had this budget neutral plan and we could go forward, it was smooth sailing for me. And I don't know how that looks in other school districts, but I was the one getting the pressure from all around. And so even if folks are not in that same situation that I was in, I would think if they start, talking about the benefits of electric, I mean, I don't think it takes much convincing these days. And so to get folks on board, politicians and school boards and things like that, especially if you go with the budget neutral message.
I would only offer up that I think grassroots sort of task forces at the local level can be really effective. And there's a lot of communities around the country that have sort of renewable energy or sustainability task forces that are typically volunteer organizations, and they're tackling community solar and, community choice aggregation and topics like that. But they're typically a well-suited bunch to tackle something like this. And they have, support from the community. They know how to get the superintendent on the phone. They know how to get school board members. And so I think they can be really powerful.
I would guess that many school systems are like us and had an annual sustainability report, right? So we were finding ourselves constantly explaining why we weren't doing more in the transportation sector. As you said, Eve, it's one of the biggest contributors, right? And so we were constantly explaining why we weren't doing alternative fuel in transportation. And so there were lots of happy people when we made this decision. And I would think that would be the case in many other school districts.
Absolutely. Thank you both for your thoughts on that. And I think, connecting with any local grassroots organizations, that Environment America has a bunch of state chapters, and then other coalition groups like Moms Clean Air Force and League of Conservation Voters are doing a lot on electric school buses. Great. And so next up, I think we have some time for a few more questions. So this is for Todd and Duncan generally. So as we're pushing for more federal and state funding, as those grants become available, will school districts be able to take advantage of these grant funds immediately, or kind of what's the process of schools actually getting access to this federal funding once it's granted?
We've been tracking this pretty closely, and I think the answer is we don't know yet. It'll be up to the agencies or the agency that ends up housing the federal incentive to come up with the details on how it gets rolled out. And there's lots of examples, right? The solar industry has an ITC, which is first come, first serve. If you meet the qualifications, you get it. You know, the EPA programs, you know, programs like the DERA program in the past, it's been a lottery, and then others programs are designed where you apply for a grant on merit. And I think we don't know yet what it's going to look like, but we're excited to hear about the details of how it's designed.
One of the things I would say on the grant front is that I've talked to a number of districts that have started kind of seed programs with a bus or two, and some of them even have more than that, but they've been funded by grants. And a couple of things I would say there is, one is they had to worry about the timing of the grant, right, and when funds would be available compared to their own local school system funds. But the other thing is they had to then come up with all the expertise, right, to apply that grant. I certainly didn't have it. I knew that I couldn't gain it quickly enough to implement a grant. So I probably would have been the holdup in the grant process on our side, right? While we were getting enough expertise to try to implement an electric bus program. When we ended up with Highland, it fixed both of those problems, right? Highland has the vision of investing over the long term and making back their money over time. And so they're a little bit less concerned about the timing of the grants than the school system is with a one-year budget, right? So Duncan knows grants are coming. He probably suspects with a Biden administration, right, more grants were coming than he probably thought, you know, a year and a half ago. And so he knows that's coming, and therefore that gives them more confidence in their investment. I'm speaking for Duncan, he can correct me if I'm wrong here. But the other deal is that the expertise, right? I mean, they came along with people that already know how to do this. And so we were able to start a program. We signed our contract in February of this year, and we're anticipating the delivery of our first 25 buses within the next month or so. I mean, that's at lightning, pun intended there, lightning speed here on electrification. We would have never made that schedule if we'd have tried to figure out grant timing on our own or applied our own expertise.
Great, thank you both. And so next, just have a question about, so the note that I mentioned a little bit, there's a couple different kinds of alternative fuel vehicles that are not just electric and diesel. And so for both of you, why do you think that electric buses are a better alternative than, say, clean diesel or propane or methane gas powered buses?
I think I'll provide quick thoughts. There's a number of different technologies out there, and I think the general trend is to cleaner, lower emissions vehicles, and diesel buses have been, emissions have been reduced sort of in stair steps over the past 25 years. So, the diesels operating in Montgomery County today are far, far cleaner than the ones that Todd would have bought 15 years ago. But we're on a mission to eliminate greenhouse gases to the extent we can, go to a clean environment. And we think electric is that end goal. We would also argue that electric has the staying power of many, many decades into the future. These batteries have a tremendous life in front of them. They'll move students around for 12 years. If they lose the power to move students around, they'll be repurposed into providing grid services. They will have 3 or 4 lives. And that's an environment that we really need to sort of cultivate and create sort of an enduring ecosystem around, because there's far more value than is really sort of realized or present today. When you look at a combustion fueled vehicle, it tends not to have a second life. It tends to really have one purpose, And so, that's one of the things that we believe in.
So I think I would say that I don't know for sure that electric is better. I'm certainly far from being an environmental expert or a greenhouse gas expert or any of those things. But I can tell you that I see the tide washing over the school bus industry, right? And I've seen that in the last several national meetings and things like that. It's clearly coming. And so I want to be, I don't want to be one that's going a different direction from the way the whole industry is moving. I think there'll be more supports for electric. I think that's the way the manufacturers are going. I think that's where the new technology improvements are going to be. I have some districts around me that are using some of the grant money right now to invest in propane. And so I asked one of my colleagues, I said, I don't understand why right now, like if you had been propane for years, I wouldn't necessarily say you have to all overnight move away from propane, but I don't know why you would, if you were going to start into a new fuel now, I don't know why you would pick anything with electric from what I see is happening in the school bus world. And it looks to me like this is going to sweep over the school bus industry like no other technology that I've seen in my 25 years. It looks like it's coming fast, and it looks like everybody's going to be moving that direction to me.
That's really exciting to hear, and I hope that's the way, because we at Environment American also definitely agree that electric buses are the way to go. And yeah, there are like a bunch of different alternative fuel vehicles out there, but studies have shown that even at the current electricity mix, electric buses are much cleaner than methane or diesel hybrid buses, and that's only going to become cleaner as we also drive our electricity sector to be powered more and more by renewable sources. So exciting to see that that's where the trends are already going with electric school buses, and hopefully that'll only speed up from here.
And I hope my answer didn't sound like I was disputing that fact. I just was saying I don't have the expertise to have such a good opinion on that, but I do see where the industry is going.
Absolutely. Thank you. And so next up, this is just kind of more of a logistical question that you both can definitely chime in on. Is just from the initial contact to the execution of this plan of the buses coming on this fall, how long did the overall process take?
So Duncan, I'm trying to remember back when our meeting with the county executive was. We went out with our RFP in, I think it was the end of August of 2020. And so I think it was probably either late spring or summer of 2020. Is that right? Or I didn't factor in the COVID year there.
Yeah, no, I think the RFI was in May or June. The RFP was in August, and our initial meeting was, I think, January 2nd of 2020. So it was a little longer than 1 year between first meeting until we had a contract signed.
And that's with being fairly new, right? I mean, certainly this budget neutral proposal was new. I suspect that time might even be shortened as this becomes more of a norm.
Yeah, and the COVID year affected everything.
Yes.
Todd was trying to get, lunches out to communities and stuff like that. You had a lot going on.
Yeah, that was absolutely going to be another follow-up question. Just given that this historic purchase of electric bus happened also when we're experiencing this historic and devastating pandemic, and so just wanted to ask how, and that we're still dealing with today, and so any school districts planning to transition will also have to kind of navigate that. So I wanted to ask you both how you were able to navigate that and still end up finalizing this deal to electrify.
So I'll start on that one. I was shocked to find out that during a year, so schools in Maryland didn't open in the fall of 2020, right? And we didn't open in Maryland, and I know that's different from different places in the country, but we didn't open for students until March of 21. And so and we closed in the previous March, right? March 13th of the previous year. So during that year, when we weren't transporting any students to school, I worked harder than I've worked in any other 3 years in my career, right? It was just amazing to me how much energy it took to figure out what to do. My boss made a profound statement early on. She said, the only way we're not allowed to do it is the way we know how to do it. I thought that was so profound, because everything took management and leadership effort to figure out how to do things differently. And so that certainly was a challenge, but and once again, I keep going back to this, and I don't know if there's others out there like Highland or whatever, but I can't tell you how happy I am to be working with a company that brought all the expertise to the table, right? They're teaching us along the way. And so me and my team are learning at an exponential rate this world of electric vehicles. But we didn't have to, the fact that we were in a pandemic didn't slow us down, because the key to getting it going was not resting on our shoulders, right? Once we made the decision to say yes, we really are relying on Highland's expertise and Highland's team to get things done. They're the ones they're the customer of the utility, right? So they're doing all that negotiations about getting all of the infrastructure ready at each of the depots. They're the ones that are working with the contractors who are installing all of the electric charging infrastructure. They're the ones working with the Thomas built buses in our case, right? To make sure that the electric buses are being produced like we want. I mean, we're involved in all those pieces to whatever extent we want to be, and we want to be because we want to learn along the way. But none of that relies on us having the time to do it or us needing the expertise to do it, right? And I can't tell you how happy that is. I look over our Bethesda depot now that has 15 charging stations and 25 charging pedestals. I look and say, I'm so happy I had somebody to work with who knew how to do all this. And so therefore the pandemic didn't really slow us down, in my opinion.
I don't think I can add anything useful to Todd's answer. We were grateful that all of our investment in, people and systems and processes and capabilities, was still welcomed and relevant. And I think we all took it a month at a time, but in the very early days in March and April, our feeling was that the whole world had shut down. And there was a question as to when kids would ever go back to school. And then as that spring rolled on and into the summer, things opened back up. And, net, we've got more interest today in electrifying school bus fleets than we did before COVID. I don't think that has anything to do with COVID. I think it's more just the evolution of the market and the maturity of the technology and the comfort level and interest in sustainability. And the only one thing I'll add is in the middle of COVID, there's a picture that I'm getting framed because I love it for my office. But it was a picture of a city in India where you could see the Himalayas in the background, and nobody had seen the Himalayas from the city in 30 years because of smog. And the city just cleared up because no one was allowed to leave their homes. And so that to me is a really powerful message that we should be working on our transportation systems and our power plants alike to clean up our air and promote these efforts.
Yeah, absolutely. That's extremely important. I think was one of the interesting side effects of many people having to stay home. And so this is our next question. I think just to clear up a little bit of confusion about kind of the process of replacing a school bus fleet. And so we have a question that says, do you purchase new electric buses year by year as diesel buses age out, or do you transition and get 100% of your new electric buses all at once? And so which one of these do you do, and why do you do it that way?
So I think I'll start on that one. And so I've heard some proposals. In fact, at least one of the responses to our RFP was wanted to replace our whole 1,400 buses in like 3 years. And other people have said to me, what about that method? And I said, well, we already have a lot invested in the 1,400 diesel vehicles we own, right? And so to some degree, I think it would be irresponsible to kind of toss them aside and not get what the taxpayer money we've invested in those, right? And I know that means we electrify a little bit more slowly, but there's a lot invested in those buses right now. The other reason I want to go year by year, and we about 10 years ago decided that we used to have kind of peaks and valleys in our purchases, and it really messed with our budget. And so we decided about I think it's been a little longer than 10 years ago now, that we were going to buy a 12th of our fleet every year for replacement. And that set us up to, one, flatten out our budget. We knew exactly how many we were going to buy. We were a predictable customer for our school bus dealer. And the other thing is that it sets you up well into the future. And so if we were to go out now and let's say we were even to do 500 buses in a year, then 12 years from now, I'm going to have to do 500 buses in that year also. And so I believe you set yourself up for a sustainable plan in a non-environmental way, right? A financially sustainable plan if you replace the same number of buses every year and do life cycle replacement of your fleet. So I'm a big believer in that, and that's how we're going to electrify, and that's why we're going to electrify year by year rather than massive purchases all at once.
I think Todd is spot on. You know, it's difficult to start pulling diesel engines out and retrofitting vehicles. The fact that he's retiring 120 vehicles every year, anyways, he's got an option to buy electric or buy diesel. And so it's a natural replacement cycle. That the technology gets better every year. So it's better for Todd to get the newest tech and the best electric buses coming off the line. And I think that consistency and continuity is a really appropriate way to do it. It's kind of how we recommend when we're speaking with fleet customers who are interested in our model. It's what we tend to recommend is create a long-term plan to make the fleet transition happen in a appropriate manner.
Absolutely, that makes a lot of sense. Thank you for sharing about that. So we are a few minutes away from the end of this webinar. We might have a chance for a couple more questions, but just want to give people a time check if you're attending. And so another question that we have come in, and this is probably primarily for Todd, but Duncan, if you also have any thoughts, is that as you are replacing these diesel buses with electric buses, are there any plans to prioritize equity when deploying these electric buses, or kind of how does that work based on where you put these electric buses within the district in Maryland? And if there are any plans, if you can elaborate on those.
So equity was a big issue for us. And so because we signed the contract in February, wanted to start this fall, we knew the timeline was short. And so as Duncan and his team assessed all the depots to figure out which ones were ready kind of electrically, right, and which ones needed more electrical infrastructure, we found that the depot of ours that was easiest to electrify because there was already enough power coming by adjacent on the street was in our wealthiest part of our county, right? And so right away we had some equity issues and some political correctness issues and whatever. And so we used a plan. We have 25 high school clusters in our system, right? 25 high schools and their feeder schools, and 4 of them are served out of this wealthiest depot. And so rather than take all the buses the first year and deploy them to those schools, we actually handled the logistics internally. So out of that one depot, even though it's, there's some logistical wrangling for us, we are going to run, the reason we picked 25 is so that we could run one of those buses in each one of those high school clusters in that first year, even out of that one depot. So we're going to put some deadhead mileage on those getting to where we need to be for the day. But we're gonna spread those out across all parts of our county exactly for equity purposes. And then in year 2, we electrify 3 more of our 5 depots, and so we'll be already much more spread across the county. And then in the 3rd year, we electrify our final depot. So we will take care of making sure that there's a even spread across all of our communities. But we're being very purposeful about deploying them in an equitable way the first year.
Great, thank you so much. And yeah, Duncan, if you have any thing that you wanted to add to that question.
Nope, I think Todd nailed it.
Awesome. All right, so we are currently at the 6 p.m. mark, and I'm sorry we weren't able to get through all of the questions. We had a bunch coming in, but if you do have any other follow-up questions, I'm just going to drop my email in the chat, and I can make sure to connect you if I can't answer the question myself, or if you would like to contact the speakers directly as well. And so, yeah, just thank you again, everyone, for coming out to this webinar tonight. And thank you so much to Duncan and Todd for taking the time to speak with us and share expertise and information on this issue. We think it's a really, really important and exciting issue that's garnering a lot more attention right now. And so it's really great that you all made the time to share it with us tonight. And so that, I think we're gonna wrap up the webinar. And so I hope everyone has a good rest of your evening.
Yeah, Eve,
Thank you
just
for having
quickly
us.
in the chat, someone asked for our contact information. You should feel free to pass it along to anyone who's interested. Okay.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
And thank you.
All right.
All right.
Goodbye.
Bye.